I'm Christian Ashley, and you're listening to the Why I Don't Like podcast, a proud Anazal Ministries podcast. Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of the Why I Don't Like podcast. I'm your host, Christian Ashley, here to entertain you as I sit down and record episodes on the media that I consume and yet I don't like. So this has been in the making for a little bit. Nice to have you around, Tolkien Pop. Hope you enjoy what's going on here. So let's just get into this bad boy. Who am I? If you don't know who I am, I'm Christian Ashley of Systematic Ecology, to Let Nothing Move You podcast, amongst a lot of other things that I guest on. I am a seminary student right now in my about to be third year, hopefully going into pastoral ministry. I'm an author. I've written 4 books. I'll provide descriptions and links later on for you if you're interested in all that. So, hey, just thank you for tuning in. This is going to be both a kind of hybrid thing of both YouTube and podcasting. So I'm looking forward to getting into all this. I'm doing this mostly because there are some times when I experience different forms of media, and I just quite don't like what they're attempting to do with their product. I mean, has anyone else ever felt that before? It's like you can't really get behind what they're doing. Yeah, and this is kind of a show built around that idea of like, hey, I'm not, I'm not quite into what you're about. So into this process, you might be going, okay, what is the show actually about? What isn't it about? Well, let me help you out in that regard. So here's what the show is and isn't. The show is going to be critical. It is also going to be constructive in its reviews, very hopefully. I am not always an objective person. I do my best to attempt to be, um, but that's part of the show. I want to be as constructive as possible. Thanks for tuning in, Joshua. Good to see you there, buddy. So there's that. So if you're on the podcast right now and you're wondering who are these people who are shouting out, that's because I am live streaming this to YouTube at the very beginning, and I'll explain my plans on what to do with that later. But to continue with the show is and what the show isn't. The show is a way for me to air out grievances with the chosen media I've selected. It is an exploration of that unlike media in full. I'm not here to just say, hey, I think this movie sucks, and then spend 5 minutes talking about it, but not actually pour over what it's about. Like, have the movie explain itself, and then me have my gripes aired about what it does. Just to give an example, this show is a place for me to vent to a captive audience. So, thank you everyone for sticking around so you can hear that. It is going to be a show and a place where alternative opinions are respected. Look, I know, especially with the show I'm starting off with, there are a lot of rabid fans. And I know there's someone in the audience right now, and they know who they are, that when I do get to stuff like the sequel trilogy of Star Wars, they're going to be very adamant against some of the opinions that I have, and that's okay. So I want this to be a place where, yes, I am going to be the mouthpiece here, expressing my personal views on what I do and do not like. That's cool. But not everyone has to think the same way I do, and that's a good thing. So that's that. And the show is also supposed to be fun. I'm here to have fun. I'm just not here to just rag on the things that I hate and I don't like and then leave you kind of feeling helpless or worthless or something like that. Like, that wouldn't be a very fulfilling show to me. So that's what the show is. What the show isn't, it isn't supposed to be a place where we're just here to bash and or hate the unlike media that I particularly don't like in this respect. Like, there's a way to say I don't like something without being spiteful and hateful about it, just to say, "Hey, look, I have these gripes with it. I don't gel with the characterization or the world building, what have you, of something." Be constructive about that. Don't just hate for the sake of hating. As I get another message from Joshua, yeah, just because you're wrong, though. most likely in reference to the sequel trilogy films. So we'll argue that when that time comes. The show also isn't going to rebrand itself from the Why I Don't Like podcast title to instead be called the Why I Hate podcast. If I'm doing that, I'm failing you miserably as a mouthpiece for my opinions. Like there are some things that I really truly do hate, but I need to be as nuanced as possible as I'm relaying that information to you. I don't need to be spewing hate from every word that I say. And there are plenty of things out there that will earn my ire, but I hope I'm not just yelling at you about why I don't like it. The show also isn't a way to tell you that you are wrong to enjoy something that I don't. Imagine, if you will, that media that you watch, listen, experience, someone has a different opinion than you. Hmm. And yet they watched the same thing you did and they came out with a positive experience. Or I came out with a positive experience and you hated it. That's fine. I'm not here to tell you how to think. And if I'm doing that, I'm failing you. And I'd rather not do that. And finally, this also isn't going to be a place for people to act like jerks. We kind of have a saying around here for the Anazao Ministries podcasting network, which we are a part of. You can be a Christian and not be a jerk. Well, that applies just beyond Christianity in general. Like, you can be a fan or you can be even a hater and not be a jerk. It's okay. Let's all just air out our grievances or talk about the things we really like and then move on with our lives. There are more important things to fight battles over, and it ain't that. So, in regards to this show's schedule, uh, I am going to set it as an every week release, but that does not mean that is always going to happen. I reserve the right to change that at any time. Right now, I am in one of the least busy periods of my life because I am not in classes. I will be taking some summer classes a month from now, but that may or may not change how the schedule goes. But the school year may very well change that. I'm taking 15 hours next semester in a program that recommends you do 9, just so I can take advantage of 2 free classes. So if shows don't show up, every week, that's why. Or I just wasn't able to record. That's fine. So don't get all uppity at me just because it didn't arrive when exactly you wanted it to. Now, as explained a little bit earlier, I'm going to stream first on the YouTube pages for Systematic Geekology and the Anazao Ministries podcast AMP page on YouTube. And I'm going to upload the podcast version Fridays at 6 a.m. Now, here's an important part here. Case in point, real quick. There are going to be pauses. There are going to be times when things aren't edited because this show is not going to be edited. I am not an editor. I have a friend who edits. He was just in a chat. But he also has enough on his plate without me adding one more thing. And I also realized too, I said, oh, these will probably be about 20, 30 minutes long. And then I realized how much work I was going to be doing and how long it took me to get the synopses down and all this. And that's not true. So these are going to be as long as I want, as long as it needs for me to go. This show will not be edited. And if that's something that you're not for, I do not in any way blame you. Please just we'll just part ways. And I won't blame you for that. Just have your own fun, do your own thing. So in regards to that, no editing. I'll say it again. So I am planning as part of this show to commit to critiquing multiple forms of media. This isn't just an anime only or a comics only or television only kind of shows. Like, there are plenty of things that I have experienced in the media, in different media, where I've gone, yeah, I don't like that. So I'll be doing those things. Our first one is, if you haven't figured out by the episode title, Mushoku Tensei, otherwise known as Mushoku Tensei Jobless Resurrection, which I believe is just a direct translation of the Japanese. I will only be covering the anime. This is because I have not read the light novels. I've not read the manga or the original web novel, so I'm sticking to the anime medium for that. Then once we're done, whenever we do catch up to this current season, that part 2 of season 2 that's airing right now, we'll switch on to a different form of media. And I plan for that to be the sequel trilogy of Star Wars. So my plan for that is to be about maybe 20, 30 minutes of the movie, critique that part, starting with episode 7, going all the way to episode 9, and not even skipping the worst film of all time, The Last Jedi. I will, for the sake of this podcast, actually rewatch it and critique it as the events go through that. There's that. God help me. Next up will also be something I'm going to need God's help for, and that is I'm unwillingly revisiting one more day the story from The Amazing Spider-Man, where he and Mary Jane sell their marriage to the Marvel analog to Satan and Mephisto because the writers can't handle a happily married man, and they're a bunch of little whiny crybabies. And that's not exactly it, but we'll get there when we get there. And I think the next thing I plan to do, and some of these are subject to change, just like if I have other ideas, if you guys suggest something to me, and hey, I don't like it, I'm free to add that to the schedule whenever I want. This is for fun. This is for me to air out grievances and stuff like that. So if it's something that I'm not a fan of, and you say, hey, why don't you try this? I'll probably add it to the list. So the last one would be playthrough. Uh, excuse me, is I will be doing another playthrough on my own time and then coming back and reporting to you on Mass Effect 3 for our video game section. And I'll be deciding other options later. If I don't get anything or if, they're not quite up to the task for my purposes here, I'll just be doing those. So next up, our first topic once more is going to be Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation. I will be going at a rate of about 2 anime episodes per episode of this podcast, outside of some outlier episodes where I'll do 3 episodes instead. There's some OVAs as well to throw in there. Also because there's some uneven season listings. So I'll do my best to warn you in advance if you for whatever reason are watching them alongside me, which I would encourage, so that it's fresher in your mind. Yeah, have at it. So I'll be covering synopses of these episodes, stopping when I have something to praise, critique, or remark on. Once again, it's not going to be a wholly negative show. There are plenty of things I do like about Mushoku Tensei, sorry, that also make me angry because I wish some of the things were better. So, thus, this will be a podcast that spoils the source material. If that's something you go, I don't know, spoilers aren't my thing, also be free. I have no ill will towards you in that regard. Now, in regards to Mushoku Tensei itself, I would like to give a slight content warning over the show as a whole due to sexual references and scenes, some language, and violence. Not the worst things in the world for some of that stuff, but I know some people out there can't handle that. So, in order to warn you about that beforehand and the sexual stuff today alone, some people might not be quite happy that I'm talking about, but it's what happens in the show. So, I can't really just ignore it. So, in regards to the show itself, I will be watching it sub this time around. I've already listened to it in English. And as I'm writing notes, frankly, it's just better to have the subtitles up there. I'm not a sub or dub purist. I typically listen to dub because I speak English and I can do other things while that's happening. So there's that. So when we do catch up to the latest season, which is going to be in a couple weeks, so we'll have plenty of time to get there. And I don't think season 3 has been announced at this point in time. We're just gonna wait until there's another full season to dissect again. So, say we finish this, we'll just go straight into what did I say earlier? We'll just go straight into the sequel trilogy. And if something pops up along the way, we will interrupt whatever we're doing once that season has finished, so we can cover it again. So there's that. So, what is Mushoku Tensei? I keep wanting to add an O at the end. Jobless Resurrection. It is one of the highest selling light novel series of all time. It is an incredibly popular anime series. It is one that led to a revitalization of in many aspects of the isekai genre. That is not the first isekai web novel, light novel ever written, but it helped bring a lot of the tropes into the genre. It helped create a lot of buzz around it. So people were very excited when about 9 to 10 years after it first released, it got its own anime adaptation. So before we go any further to Mushoku Tensei, let's explain what isekai is. If you're out there and you go, I have no clue what isekai is. That's some Japanese term. Well, absolutely, yes, it is. It means another world. Sekai means world. I think the I part, the isekai makes it another in that sense. I'm not a Japanese language expert, so feel free in the comments to correct me if I ever get something wrong. I am well up to being corrected when I do something wrong. So thank you for that. If you do such a thing, if I do screw up, basically, it's when a character is in most likely our world. There are things called reverse isekais where, like, from fantasy worlds, people end up in our world. But for the most part, it's when a character is taken from where they are into another world. Could be science fiction, could be fantasy, could be post apocalyptic, something like that, where they then have to live in this world. It can be done through things like reincarnation or being summoned by some magical force in that world, or there's some uh what's what we're looking for here? Some anomaly that sucks them away from this reality, puts them elsewhere. There are many ways it can be done. And as a genre, it's not exclusive to Japan. There's actually many Western stories that lead to the isekai genre that have been it's been applied to them after the fact. So there's that. Now back to Mushoku Tensei. This was created and written by Raifujin na Maganote as a web novel on the Shosetsuka ni Naru website. And this is a website that's, for those of you, it's kind of like Fiction Press to an extent, or in a lesser form, kind of like fanfiction.net, where it allows users to upload novels for free and to be read for free. But the thing is, it's way more popular there, to the point that some of them get picked up to become light novels and you can actually make a dime off of them. And this is exactly what happened with Mushoku Tensei. The story itself was written from 2012 to 2015 and it has received 24 total volumes when it also became a light novel series. Our main character here is Rudius Grey Rat. His unnamed Japanese original self, which to this day I don't think we still don't know his name, and I think that's beyond the anime at that point. Yeah, I don't think even a light novel reveals his actual name. He dies saving some kids from being run over by a truck, something that also kind of became part of the genre thanks to it kind of creating it to an extent as a trope. Ends up in another world, reincarnated as a baby, learns magic, uh, and goes across the land through the different shenanigans that happen there to try and become a better mage, to try and find his family. Lots of things go on. Some things praiseworthy, some things not so much. So my own history with isekai. I love the idea of an isekai very much. I wish it were better handled as a genre. I have lots of gripes with isekai shows. It's, fetishization. Goodness gracious, I cannot say words. Fetishizing slavery as an acceptable practice in any way, shape, or form happens way too often. And to a lesser extent, it does happen in Mushoku Tensei, but not nearly as bad as other shows. There are plenty of so-called good protagonists who have their own little slave harem of women who just fall in love with them because they're just so great. And yeah, we could easily make them not slaves anymore and actually help the power dynamics there. But nope, no, we've got to make them slaves. Another thing too, I have huge gripes on is the portrayal of women. Like most of the time, they're seen as just sexual objects with very little characterization of their own, which this series is not terribly bad at. I will give it that. There's far better ones out there. Um, so yeah. So one of my first real isekai that I liked is what you see on screen here. If you're on YouTube, it says Aura Battler Dunbean. It's kind of a proto isekai. There have been other stories done beforehand, stuff like that, but this is more of a mecha series where Byston Wells is uh, kind of, if I remember correctly, it's been so long since I watched the show. This different plane between our Earth and where it's at, and there's some crossover between the two. And our main characters, are taken from Japan and Texas and a couple of other areas on our Earth to serve as fighters in this war in this fantasy realm, mixed with all this mecha action. it's really extremely good, and I'm poorly explaining it, but it's well worth the watch. But it shows like this that created, shall we say, what's the word I'm looking for here? Standards for other isekai to rip off of, sometimes well, sometimes, most times, very poorly. And that has led to, if you look at your My Anime List schedule for what's going to be happening in the next anime season, you're going to see lots and lots of isekai because hey, people eat it up. And I am one of those people. Like, I am part of the problem. I will say that. It is trash. Most of them are utter trash, and yet I keep coming back hoping that one of them will prove me wrong and actually be good. And there are a couple, and I'll list a couple of them in a little bit. But for the most part, they just kind of make me angry. And my breaking point really was Rising of the Shield Hero and stuff like that. So that it was shows like that that inspired me to write my own isekai story. Like I said earlier, I am a writer, independently published through the Starving Writers Guild and Amazon, and I created Resurrection Live. This is not intended as like an advertisement, as a haha. I just made you spend 20 some minutes just to get to my story. It's like, no, no, this is my personal story that brought me to this point. Is discovering, okay, what about the genre do I like? What don't I like? And I would say ultimately I did fairly well. There's still some things I'd go back and I'd change, having written it about 2+ years ago. But still, it's like, why can't it be more like this? Why can't we have actual characters? Why can't we demean the evil things in the world instead of like glorifying things like, sexual assault and slavery and all those things that end up happening multiple times over in isekai and just being brushed over? There are way too many female characters who experience sexual assault in isekai or slavery or something like that, and they just kind of brush past it because they're really just there to be your differently colored waifu so that you can lust over them ultimately at the end of the day. And that's terrible characterization. That's a terrible idea, and I don't like that. So I want it to be better. I want better for isekai. And I'm trying not to add the S as plural there because that doesn't quite work in Japanese. So yeah, it's immensely frustrating to see all the potential, and that's one of the reasons I have huge issues with Mushoku Tensei is I see a ton of potential here, some really good things that get ruined by people like your main character. But we'll get there when we get there. So, Christian, you spent all this time saying you don't like isekai. Is there any isekai do you actually like besides Aura Battle of Dunbean? Well, let me get you there. First off, Faraway Paladin. Only 2 seasons out so far. Once again, I'm not a light novel reader, so I don't know how the story goes from here, but so far, this story gets it. There's no, you know, needless sexualization of characters. There's no, yeah, slavery is a good thing, guys. There's no, there's not a lot of the BS that exists in other isekai stories. It is a fantasy story where another character is transported to another world, gains powers, gains a crew of people of true companions, and does some good in the world. That is a story I can get behind. And of course, once again, there's Aura Battle of Dunbean, great mecha action show. Tomino behind it, he of Gundam fame. Excellent story. There's some bittersweet ending, I will say that, for those of you who can't really handle that. But ultimately, yes. Then we have something like Konosuba. It's like a direct contrast to other shows. It's an isekai comedy. And like, hey, the isekai part is important because that is part of Kazuma's characterization there. It's really important to him. It's not a perfect series by any stretch of the imagination. And none of these series that I'm proposing to you, even the ones that I would put out as a 10 as a 10, excuse me, 10 out of 10, which Konosuba would not be, but for the sake of just the argument there, like it it works. And that's why I enjoy it. It does what it's supposed to do. Then we have, A Sentence of a Bookworm. It's not your typical isekai, but it's our girl, mine, just trying to bring reading and learning to other people in another world. She's just a vibrant character, so much fun. There are some things that happen later on because once again, I'm an anime only, and I hear spoilers, and I don't mind spoilers. But there's one thing that kind of gets me a little upset in a possible relationship and messed up power dynamic there. But for the most part, do enjoy Sentence of a Bookworm. The Eminence in Shadow, another action comedy isekai done extremely well. Sid is like the perfect protagonist for this series, the one where you constantly having characters go, "Man, oh, he's been planning this from the very beginning," when he was doing exactly the opposite of what they were expecting, and yet he always gets the results he wants. He's such a great BSer to the point where the things that he says that he knows aren't true end up becoming true. It's so much fun. Well worth your time. Then we have ReZero. I have a lot of gripes with ReZero, but ultimately I'm very positive on it. It the early seasons are the worst. After that, it's improved drastically. Once again, have not read the light novel it is based on, so I have no clue if it gets worse. But what I have read, excuse me, what I have watched, pretty dang good. Then we have Digimon. Now, some people say, Digimon, how's that an isekai? Well, they go to the digital world. Duh. I mean, how's that not an isekai? And then, of course, one of the greatest isekais of all time, The Chronicles of Narnia. Which, yeah, if you think about it, it is an isekai. Definitely wasn't what C.S. Lewis was intending to do as far as like his terminology for everything. But at the end of the day, what else could it be but an isekai? So that's it for those. We're going to do something that I'm going to attempt to do every show. The show is called Why I Don't Like. And an easy thing to do in that is to be overly negative because you're focusing on the things, hey, that you don't like. So, one thing I would like to do is kind of start the show before we get into the synopses and my breaking them down and all that mess. Is we do a little something called Something I Do Like. And that would be Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. I just saw this again in theaters for like the 40th anniversary of Ghibli. It is a phenomenal film. I cannot sing this movie's praises enough. It is my favorite Ghibli film easily. We've got a strong female character who isn't one of those, "I'm just one of the guys," or like, "I'm so most powerful, more stronger than everyone," instead of actually writing, a tough woman character who has feelings, who fails, who also, screws up and yet is still a hero at the end of the day, still working for a greater good. Cannot say how much I love this series more than I already have. Like, yeah, if you haven't watched Nausicaa, you're missing out. Now into other matters. Shall we say matters on things that I don't like. We're going to be starting with season 1, part 1, episode 1, Jobless Reincarnation of Mushoku Tensei. And in so doing, we open up at the site of a traffic incident. A man in his mid 30s has been hit by a truck, and two high school students are missing from the scene. We see a third student who survived as they take the man away in an ambulance, mentioning that he's very heavy. That's kind of somewhat important. In voiceover, the man explains he's been a shut in for 20 years. As his consciousness starts to fade, he hears a man's voice speaking in another language and he dies in the hospital, wishing he could have lost his virginity, only to open his eyes to see a man and a woman who treat him like a child. He takes the time to comment on the woman's breasts being large, wonders if she's European given her skin color, and then tries to molest her breasts, only to find that he's a baby and that he's been reincarnated. That is the opening scenes of our show. Mm, yeah. So if you're like me, there's a ton of whiplash happening here. You have the standard of, Truck Coon coming in. That's kind of a, for those of you who don't know in the genre, it's a supposed character in the show who is responsible for having or killing the main character so that they can be reincarnated in another world. And I believe this may have been the first time that happens in isekai genre and definitely popularized it, if nothing else. But we start with some voiceover here. We get some characterization of whoever this unnamed person is that makes him kind of skeevy, kind of lewd, and really kind of a leech on society. And we'll get to that more often in the later bits here. But it also does a good enough job of establishing, hey, this is still modern Japan. There was an accident. We're missing two of three students, which is important. Don't forget that. It takes a while, but don't forget that. And I still don't know where one of them is. And at this point, oh, yeah, I talk about that. I think I might have skipped over that line accidentally. Yeah, as he dies in a hospital, he kinda wishes that he'd lost his virginity. I accidentally skipped over that line, my bad. Which is kinda like, okay, sure. Let's talk about the characterization of our main protagonist who has yet to be named. We don't know the full extent yet. We will find out later that he did, attempt to save the people who are about to be run over by the truck. Seems to have succeeded in some way, shape, or form. We'll get to why I think that's out of character for this person later on when we get to the second episode, but for now, seems to be noble in that extent. He also, is a very heavy set person, and to the point where people remark on it, seems like has been letting himself go along the way, and then what does he do as he's dying? Just wishes, "Oh, man, I wish I would've lost my virginity." Okay, that can be something you think about. I'm not against the idea as using that as characterization, especially when we learn more about him along the way. It's like it's kinda like, Chainsaw Man, for those of you who are reading that and watching that. One of Denji's, motivating goals is to get laid. I mean, there's no other way around it, and in fact, our most recent chapter kinda has him say, "Oh, man, I'm real bad about this. Maybe it'd be better if I didn't have that as a my libido active all the time," and we'll see how that ends up along the way. I trust in Fujimoto a little bit. But you look at him, that's part of his loss of interacting with other human beings. And we will learn more about this main character here. But just kind of like comparing and contrasting Denji for a bit. Yeah, Denji grew up poor, unloved by his father, abused by his father, didn't really have contact with people, would just eat garbage just to stay alive, was treated by trash, given a debt that he could never repay, and how he's finally liberated. He can actually seek out things. He can eat good food. He could potentially even find, someone to be in a relationship with. Good things, but it gets in his head, and that's one of his flaws as a character is he thinks about those things. Our main character here is a huge character flaw, but sometimes I wonder if the author thinks it's that. And that kind of gets brought to the forefront when, oh, he sees a woman with, hey, there's no other way around it. She's got some big breasts. Yeah, as you can see there on the picture on YouTube. Noting that is not a problem. You know, our eyes see what our eyes see, and he sees that. And we are wired to look at those because they're part of our human what's what I'm looking for here, our biological needs, our desires. There's nothing inherently wrong with the idea. It's how we use those things that becomes an issue. And he most definitely is using them for ill gain. And without even knowing who this woman is, having just experienced death, what is our protagonist thinking? Well, he's thinking, man, she got some big breasts. She European? Oh, what am I going to do? Oh, I'm going to molest her because, oh, you left yourself wide open. That's who we want as our main character for this show. Now, we can have this scene if it leads to him cleaning up his act, if it leads to learning as part of his journey along the way. That does not happen. Not as much as I would like it to. So what this does force him to do is his goal of reaching to molest her is what makes him realize that he's a baby now and he's been reincarnated elsewhere. Surely there was some better way to write that in. Once again, I'm not opposed to him noticing that she's got a good figure because guess what? She does. I am very much opposed to his motivations after learning that about her instead of like thinking, hey, I should probably learn who this is. I was just dying a second ago. That is this strange woman and another man in the room. What should I be doing? He does the exact opposite of what he should be doing. And it's hurtful as characterization. It's very hurtful to watch. Like, what is this mess? And had I not experienced other people saying, you've got to stick through this, you've got to see what else is going on, I probably would have dropped the show either right here or what's going to happen in the next scene. So before we do that, let's get into reincarnation real quick. Reincarnation basically is the idea that you are incarnating, you are taking over another body after having previously lived as another form, another human, what have you. Many religions of the world experience it. Hinduism, some Buddhists, uh, Jains believe in it. You'll find it kind of in Shintoism a little bit too. It's not. I need to study Shintoism more to actually give like a full proof. Yeah, that's exactly what they believe. But many cultures do believe in it. Now, if you haven't left because I said I'm a Christian, well, I'm going to do that for a little bit. Christians, most Christians, don't believe in reincarnation. There are many reasons for this. You got your Hebrews verse where it says, every man is appointed to die once. You've got Jesus telling the thief on the cross, like, you're going to be in paradise with me today, not in oh, well, you're just moving to the next body after this. Many other things because it doesn't make sense within our own system for that to be a thing. So reincarnation is a huge part of the series. And unlike other isekai, I will throw this in its favor. It focuses on the fact that our individual main character here, I'm going to call him Rudy. His name is Rudius. We'll get there. If you haven't watched the show, his name is Rudius. I'm so tired of saying our main character. That is a part of his characterization is that he remembers his old life, was reincarnated into this brand new spanking body, and that comes with baggage, immense baggage. So that once again, in this show's favor, I will praise it for that. Oh yeah. Oh, excellent point, Matthew Winter. Yes, some people do take that verse when Jesus is talking about. Oh goodness gracious! There's the Malachi verse talking about there's going to be a new Elijah, and there's Jesus talking about John as Elijah. The idea being is that he is a new Elijah in this present day, as characterization for him, as letting people know that's who he is as a person. So yeah, that's how I take those verses, and I can see how people could struggle with that. That makes a lot of sense. Let's see. We'll get to you in a second. Yeah. So there's that. Reincarnation is going to come up again. I haven't fully figured out my theology on the whole thing. I'll do my best along as the series goes on to like explain more as I'm learning. So we'll just move on to the next scene where we find out Rudy's parents are named Paul and Zenith. They're about in their mid-20s. He was, as we find out, 34 years old before his death. And he spends some time as our main character imagining what it'll be like to suckle Zenith's breasts, noting it didn't turn him on, perhaps because she's his mom. Once again, brave and bold characterization here for our protagonist. I'm so very happy that this is happening. So as he grows up, he gains his name Rudius, and he has spent the last 6 months of his development learning the language. Every baby has to do that. And hey, this is astounding to me as someone who is garbage at learning other languages. And this is something we want to praise the characterization for, in that he sticks with it. He attempts to learn it way faster than a normal child would, because obviously he has some of his own training before. But also at that same time, it's a lot harder because you're so used to that one language. So hearing another one at such an older age makes it more difficult. And yet he did it. So yeah, praise to Rudy's characterization there. So he takes the time, as he's 6 months old and crawling around, to go through the laundry, sniffs some panties, and wears them over his head, showing them to his family's maid Lilia as he comments on her likewise large breasts, only to have the panties taken away from him by Zenith, who listens to Lilia start to call him out on his deviancy because she's kind of figured something's off with this kid, until she relents, knowing it's probably not her station to say something like that, so whatever. Yeah, at least someone out there is thinking critically. I'll put it that way. So Rudius then looks outside of the house to see the pastoral land they live in and wonders where in Europe they are and why they don't have electricity. as he would like to play on a computer again. He watches Paul out of the window and see him practicing his swordsmanship. Kind of really calls his parents a bunch of weeaboos at this point in time for his dad sword swinging and his mom pretending like she can cast a spell. Well, guess what? She can. But he gets too excited by all this and he falls backward, hitting his head without crying, which Lilia notes as odd in general, as he never seems to cry that much like other babies would. Zenith then prepares a healing spell, making him realize that he's in another world, as Zenith reveals she used to be an adventurer as well. So we'll stop here for the synopsis for a bit. Yeah, a much better image to have on the screen. Once again, there's a huge ethical dilemma here in that there is the mind of a 34-year-old man inside the body of a 6-month-old. Now, this is something that person would have to struggle with along the way. A very difficult scenario to be put in. Like, hey, I had this life. Now I'm suddenly in this new one. I still have the thoughts and feelings that came from my old life, yet I'm also experiencing this new life here. Like, what am I supposed to do with that? Like, in a better written show, you could have him wrestle with that more. But instead, he chooses to use his 34-year-old mind to just perv on his mother and the maid. And he'll do it on more other women as well. Forgetting the fact that he's gonna grow up and, typically, in your more medieval times, you would marry younger. Let's say 14 is when that would happen, or 15. You add that on, if it's 15, that's a 49-year-old man in the body of a 15-year-old, mentally speaking. There are huge discrepancies there, and that's another problem I have is with the people he does and doesn't share with about where he actually came from the very beginning. But we'll get there when we get there. So instead, right here, it's that conundrum of, okay, when would it be acceptable? And I like that as a question. I really do. I wish it was explored better. And that's one of the frustrating things about the show is like you present great ideas, but then your follow through is maddening, extremely maddening. Why? Why do you do these things? And then look, everyone has their fetishes. We're not here to talk about that. I'm trying to keep this show as PG-13ish as possible at the worst. But like, keep him to yourself, man. Why do we need this scene of him taking the laundry and doing what he does? Why do we need that? What purpose does that serve outside of just showing he's a creep and thinking, oh, well, by people reading this, they're going to enjoy that? No, it says a lot about the person writing this than it does his intended audience, or maybe it says a lot about both. So let's move from there, from a criticism to something that I really enjoy, and that's Lilia's and Zena's kind of mini discussion that they have over Rudius not crying as a baby as much. They don't say he doesn't cry, but they notice he doesn't cry as much as other kids would at his age. And that's a very unique form of characterization I like a lot because there is an older mind in that body. So he knows really the only times he needs to cry are when he needs to be changed or he needs to feed or something like that. That's a logical thing to have thought of. So I really like that. I also really enjoy the reveal of magic in this series because hey, they probably haven't left the house too much. He doesn't really hasn't met any fantasy races or anything. For all he knows, he's in the past in Europe somewhere. But then the magic happens. He gets healed by Zenith, and that changes his life forever, mostly positively. I say that both in terms of the plot and in his own characterization. That means a lot. That is well done. And once again, I want to praise the good, disparage the evil in this series and all the other series I'll be covering. So we'll get back to the synopsis. Rudius grows up more, now curious about magic and how to use it. He finds a spell book in a family chest and decides to learn to read it. taking a full year to do so, thanks to studying the book and listening to Paul read books to him. Rudius learns that there are two ways to cast magic: incantations and magic circles, and that your potential seems to be set at birth. He crafts a water ball spell that makes a small sphere of water and and he practices some more, managing to do a little better with each casting until he realizes he can cast without incantations. He then uses several buckets and pots to catch the water as he practices, learning that your magic grows the more you practice using it, and his works better without using incantations, as he speculates that people either don't know this or choose to just use incantations because they're easier to learn and easier to teach. He conjectures that him starting so young is why he's so good at it, as he overhears his parents having sex in the other room, which seems to be a nightly occurrence, and there's nothing modest happening in the sounds there. So later, Rudius experiments even more, now able to propel water at a faster rate. He then tries to cast some intermediate magic, which creates a large burst of water that blasts a hole in the house, and at this point makes his parents realize what he's been doing. And it creates a very beautiful scene, the rainbow from the water coming out. And it's at this point Zenith requests that they hire him a magic tutor. But Paul disagrees because he wants Rudius to become a swordsman like him. But Lilia intervenes and has them both compromise to have Rudius be taught magic in the morning and swordsmanship during the day, which they agree to after having a small fight about Paul breaking his promises, which will be important later on as far as who Paul is. What's with the bad characters being named Paul? Well, he's not a bad character in this one. So we'll stop there. How magic is treated in this series is something I want to praise. The way Rudius takes the time to study it, figuring out how to do it. Not only that, but learning how to read far beyond what a child would be expected of, thanks to his mind, thanks to his previous experiences. But it's not just him learning it. Like, it's just a bunch of moon speak to him if you just look at it on the page. But because his dad reads to him, he can associate the script with letters, with words. That is well done characterization. That is well done. What's the word I'm looking for here? A way to build the world up as well. And the way magic is taught is also under criticism by how he learns how to do magic, which I find utterly fascinating because you don't expect this a lot. If you've read or watched as many terrible isekai as I have, you will know one of the grand cliches is the main character who's just good at magic. It'll normally be one or two chapters in, especially if it's not starting from birth, or they just suddenly show up in a fantasy world where they go to the adventurers guild and say, okay, we're gonna have to test your magic, and we have these 5 forms of magic or 6 or 7 or whatever. And it's, oh my gosh, you're good at all of them and you're the best ever. What's so good? And this does not do that. You have things Rudius is good at, there are things Rudius is not so good at, there's things he's garbage at. That is good. You need to set limitations for your characters. Have them able to do some things, but not others. That prevents them from becoming a Mary Sue. And I don't think that Rudius is a Mary Sue, as some people would levy against him. I think there's some things I'd definitely change about his character, as far as some of his goals later on, but he's not a Mary Sue. So we get the idea of magic being treated as like flexing your muscles. Love that. It's like the more you use it, the better you get at it. Such a great ideal. Like when you're training, like you don't, very few people start off with natural talent. Some people have to learn using some natural talent to get better. And Rudius has some natural talent, but he has more than what would be capable he would normally be capable of in this world because he kept practicing at it, kept working at it. And that whole thing about him really essentially not trusting the manual, I love that, especially as someone who has lived in the church his entire life. I put my trust and faith into the Bible. Do you know why? Not because I grew up in the church, but because I took the time to study it, because I took the time to read what people say who had to say and say it was fake or make believe or propaganda. I listened to what they had to say and I listened to what the Bible had to say. I compared and contrasted the two and realized that there was truth in there because I tested it, because I did the work for it. And many people in the church don't do that, and it infuriates me. They will regurgitate exactly whatever the pastor says if they're listening at all on Sunday and never open the book up for themselves. They never read it on their own. They never ask questions about what does it mean for these things to be true, if they are indeed true. You don't know if you don't test them. You don't know if you don't look out into them. But Rudius, as a positive point in his direction, does. It says your mana is determined by birth. You're only supposed to cast with incantations or magic circles. What does he do? Realizes that's not true, tests, hypothesizes, does the work. That is noble. That is tremendous. That makes him, at least in this part, a good character. There are plenty of other things that don't, but we'll get to those. We've touched on some of them. So we'll move on to the next scene for the first episode. See, I knew, looking at the time right now, I knew this was never going to be 30 minutes or less. So we go flash forward a bit. His parents hire Roxy McGurdia, who, despite being young, is an accomplished mage. And she is going to serve as his tutor, even though she initially doesn't think too highly of them or Rudius, who, by the way, has to tell us that, oh, she's a lolly, which he fetishizes instantly. And before I go any further, I will explain what is a lolly. It comes from the novel Lolita, where we have a younger, underage girl being fetishized and sexually admired by the older Humbert Humbert. This gets translated into Japan and becomes enough of a success that it starts getting in the cultural lingo of say, oh, those guys are they're just like younger girls, they're just lolicons. I believe con in Japan means you like something a lot or you love something a lot. I have to look that up again. Once again, please correct me if I'm wrong, which I think I am. So if that's the answer, it means you like or you love young girls. We would call that a crime over here. And it is a crime in Japan to a certain age. Uh, the age of consent is much lower than it should be over there. So this creates a culture where you introduce younger characters who are not of age, and yet you sexualize them. You make them objects of desire. You make them act flirty in ways that a younger girl wouldn't normally do at that age. There are plenty of characters I could bring up. I mean, really, all you have to do is watch, not all shows, thank God, but some. If there's a younger character, a younger female character, chances are they're going to fetishize her at some point when she's nowhere close to the age of being, someone who could be, an adult. So there's that. So back to the synopsis. Roxy later explains to Rudius that there are three types of magic: attack, healing, summoning, which are divided into beginner, intermediate, advanced, sacred, royal, imperial, and divine magic. Roxy then showcases some of her own water magic, breaking one of Zenith's trees, forcing her to repair it with healing magic. Rudius then practices his magic, and the wind he creates from casting causes him to see Roxy's panties, which distracts him to stop casting, and it makes him cast without incantations, which Roxy notices and comments on rather than the other thing, but not before they realize he too broke one of Xena's trees, which makes Roxy think she might get fired. Realizing he knows nothing about talking to girls who aren't two-dimensional or comforting people in general, Rudius decides to recycle and use some cliche dialogue from the dating sims he used to play, which does perk her up, as the whole family celebrates her coming to live with them for dinner that night, and Rudius decides he can make it in the world. So I discussed the lolicon thing. It is far more present in Japanese media than you would ever think acceptable. And it's just kind of an expected thing to happen. I don't like it, don't have to like it, but it exists there. But what I do like is once again building up the magic system of showing someone who, unlike Rudius, was taught the regular way and learns, hmm, maybe that's not right. Maybe that's not what's supposed to be happening. And that's part of Roxy's characterization through this episode and next episode that brings her character up a lot more, and that she's confronted with something different and learns from it. So we've got that. We need to talk about the discussion of ecchi. Now, if you haven't watched anime or read some manga, you've probably never come across that word ecchi. Uh, Basically, translated towards English, it means fan service. And this is fan service not of, hey, this is a callback to Marvel Team Up issue 120 where Spider-Man and whoever did this. That's a different type of fan service than we're talking about. This fan service is, typically geared towards sexualizing your characters. Now, before we go any further, I will say Mushoku Tensei is an equal opportunity offender, and I do like that. I am not against the idea of fan service. I'm not against the idea of ecchi, so long as it doesn't become gratuitous. Because once again, we are sexual beings. That's what we look at in potential partners. Now, some people take it way too far and make it something it was never supposed to be. But there's nothing initially wrong with the concept. There's nothing wrong with the idea of Leia and Jabba's palace being forced into that slave bikini. It does when you turn it into something it shouldn't be, but the original idea isn't a bad one. And having ecchi isn't a bad idea. I just wish that we're of characters of age rather than what happens multiple times over in this series with young girls being shown in these compromising positions. But I will say it does end on a good note, and that Rudius, as part of growing up, as part of dealing with his old life in Japan, wants to make it in this world. That inspires hope. That is a good thing. That is a great thing for your character to have to go through of whatever he was dealing with in Japan, which we'll talk about a little more in the next episode. The next episode here, not the next episode of the podcast. So I like that. I don't like the gratuitous ecchi. And that brings us to episode 2, Master. So we start at the beginning of the episode at Rudius's, it's a very weird sentence to have to say, Rudius's original Japanese parents' funeral. This is your sister's cousin's roommate's dog or whatever the line is from Spaceballs. It makes us absolutely nothing, but this means something. It's just a lot of words put together. So it starts at that funeral, but he is not in attendance there, preferring to spend his time in his room. And once again, if you're squeamish about this, sorry, but there's no other way to put it. He is masturbating to what is heavily implied to be lolly pornography. And he is thrown out of his house for being a leech on the family. I had a difficult time figuring out was like debt collectors or something. No, actually appears to be like his brother and a couple of other members of the family who have gotten tired of his antics and have thrown him out. and like not showing up to the funeral was like the last straw. So he wanders aimlessly on the streets until he sees a girl and two guys about to get run over by a truck. So he rushes forward to save them, dying in the process. And I'll talk about why I don't like that in a bit. He then wakes up in the present, in the new world he's in, after having fallen asleep making figurines out of earth magic. Once more overhearing his parents having sex, and thinks he'd like to have a little sister, but not a little brother, which is its own thing and another thing in Japan about incest that crops up way too often. So that's that. Um, yeah. There is something about the brother though being specifically mentioned that makes sense in light of other episodes, but we're not going to focus on that now because it hasn't been revealed. So, deciding to troll his parents, he's going to go out and pretend, "Oh, mommy and daddy, what are you doing?" When he really just wants to see the action. But he's not the only one, because when he leaves his room, he sees Roxy on the ground in way too graphic a form, like um, masturbating to it herself. And he pervs on that for a little bit and then leaves. Yeah. I swear there are better things in the series. I swear that actually make me want to stay, even despite the fact that I don't like it. So we'll get there when we get there. But let's talk first about Rudius's death and why I think it is tremendously out of character for him. It is astonishing to me as a writer that you set up a scene like you have in the past of this selfish person, this um, shut in who has never left the house in like 20 some years, who has never cared about anyone but himself in that whole time. And yet you decide, well, I'll show he's actually a good guy by trying to warn these people and getting them out of the way of the accident and dying himself. Isn't that such a redemptive moment? No, it is not. It is terribly written. There is nothing inside of Rudius's original Japanese uh, body, his person, that makes me think he's going to make this sacrifice play. There's been nothing noble about that character that we've seen. And even with uh, future characterization received in other episodes and other seasons, there is still nothing that I see that makes me believe this character is going to make this decision. You have failed completely and utterly in that regard. But you need to have a reason for him to get over to this fantasy world, but you have to make him he's not that bad a guy. No, 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 no. He's actually a good guy at heart. You got to prove it to me first, because I've seen no evidence of that. And I still don't believe it to this day. Now, from there, we go to something else I don't like, and that's the handling of sex in these scenes. Hey, you know what married couples do? What Paul and Zenith are doing. Do we need to have a reminder every night or every time Rudy is studying or doing something that they're at it and she's moaning and wailing? No, we don't. Like, how thin are these walls that this is happening? Now, granted, in your Middle Ages, especially on the European side of things, I haven't studied other cultures as much. Most houses for the poor people were one room. Now, Paul and Zenith appear to be rich, so this shouldn't be a problem for them. But married couples still had to procreate, had to have relations with one another, so they would do it, eh, unfortunately, in view of the children. That's one of the disturbing facts of the past, but it's also a thing that happened. They don't have that excuse. They live in a mansion. Surely there's not some spell too that could, prevent other people from listening in on this. Unless you want them to, which in case that's you've got other problems we need to discuss. And then we get to Rudius in the old world, where he'd rather spend his time just jacking off to pornography rather than doing anything with his life. This is an example, I believe, of the "this loser is you" trope. That is, hey, you see what this idiot is doing? Yeah, that's what my target audience is doing. Isn't that right, guys? Eh? Eh? And it's just so insulting and detrimental that you think, yeah, even if you thought that's what your audience was doing, is that what you want to call them out on? Is that what you want to say? Hey, I know what you're doing. And I say this as someone who has struggled with that in the past. I admit that fully. I am no perfect example, a perfect paragon of human sexuality myself. I fail. Thankfully, nothing physical outside of myself being involved, but still, it's a sin either way. And to be shown something like that and think, is that what you expect of me? Is that what you think I am? That I've always remained there, that I haven't improved upon myself to be better? Is that what you think of your audience? If I were the reader, which I am in a sense, I'm upset at that. Like, who are you to say that about me, author? Like, get off your high horse. There are better battles to fight there in that arena. And of course, we get to Roxy. She's a young girl. She's going to be interested in sex. Nothing inherently wrong with that. But then you have to show this scene in such, you know, loving detail that we see in the show. I'm not going to show you that image. Now, we don't see the actual physical parts, but we see the end result. And it just infuriates me immensely. How we keep coming back to this when you don't need this scene. You don't need any of this. You have, I've seen your ability to properly characterize these people and make me believe and want them to succeed in certain aspects. I don't need this. This is an example of gratuitous etchy. So we'll move on from there so I can get this creepy image off my screen to about 6 months later. Rudius has progressed to having nighttime classes with Roxy, which of course you have to say, we didn't do anything any wrong, as that would imply, where she is teaching him history and about the cultures of the world, the continents and stuff like that. And he's busy paying attention. I'll give him that part. But he has other ulterior motives where he's just perving on her legs, hoping to get another glimpse. And in her lesson, she explains that humans live alongside demons. Now, demons in this series are a race of people, not a group of evil spiritual beings as we would traditionally associate, Christian spirituality. And this does get fleshed out later, and I do like what they do there. And there's also these things called spirits that haven't really come up as much, but it kind of focuses being summoned and stuff like that. We'll get there when we get there. Roxy then explains that she herself is a demon, which is why she has her purplish blue hair. I'm sure there's some other site that could have actually listed it. I'm just calling it purplish blue. Is that just violet? I don't know, man. I don't know my colors. And she then mentions the Superd tribe of demons, who were known to be monstrous in the lore and killed indiscriminately in the Laplace War between humans and demons. They have emerald green hair and a red gem in their forehead. Well, Rudius, hearing this, compliments Roxy's hair, which flatters her, but she tells him he should save that kind of talk for a girl he likes. Rudius then tells her that he likes her. He's about 4 or 5 right now, by the way. And she teases him. Yeah, he's 4 at this time. And she teases him to come back in 10 years. He leaves the room and tries to spy on her as she's about to undress, but she tells him that the Superd will kill his family and he leaves. Ha ha ha. Isn't that so great? We just saw that. Praises first. World building. I love world building. I love it in my own books. I love reading about other people, what they do. I can even read something as dense as a Silmarillion and see what Tolkien had in mind for some of the stuff that was going on. Like, Please, like, tell me about your world. Tell me what makes it so interesting. And this is the seeds that are planted in the story that become far more important later on, that are handled extremely well. So let me once again praise that. But what I don't like is Rudius continuing to be Rudius. I will give it to him that he can focus on more than one thing at a time. I do the same, but not nearly as in the way he's doing it. I typically listen to a podcast and play a video game, or listen to music as I write, because it's nice to focus on more than one thing at one time, because that's the way my brain functions. But he's using it as an excuse to continue to just be skeevy around her, to try and get another look. And she just accepts this rather than, hey, let's talk to your parents real quick. Hey, your kid's acting way beyond his emotional age. He's 4. He shouldn't be having these thoughts. I'd be wondering what's wrong with the parents, if they were to come back and say, "Oh, there's nothing wrong with that," in this scenario. But she doesn't do that. Maybe out of some sense of, they're the ones hiring me. Maybe I can't do it. This whole thing is like women aren't quite as liberated. Even in this world, though, women are way more liberated than they were in this point in history on our side of things. So maybe there's that, but we don't get that. That's more like me trying to make up reasons for why this might work. But it's just annoying. It's stupid. I hate it. I don't like it. So we'll continue on for the synopsis. Almost 6 months later, Rudius improves with his magic lessons and trains with Paul at swordsmanship, which he's not as good at. Rudius later watches some of the kids from the village they live in play with each other, but he imagines them jeering at him and using their cell phones to film him, which freaks him out as he refuses to go beyond the borders of his house, and in some ways he's still a shut-in, just around the borders of his house though this time around. In flashback, we see him being bullied by his classmates, where he's stripped naked and filmed by them for their amusement. Roxy finds him and talks with him about how her hometown, uh, in just a way to kind of calm him down, how her hometown didn't have grass like his does, and then she points out the Red Dragon Mountains, in order to show that beyond them is the country Renoa, where she learned to wield magic at its University of Magic. And to further encourage him, she says it takes in all students, regardless of race and social status, and encourages him to go. But he wants to stay with her as his master, which she denies being anymore, saying that he's surpassing her. In private, she tries to wordlessly cast and fails, getting discouraged. Whew. So, we learn why Rudius is a shut in. And there are things I like and there are things I don't like about this. Reason being bullying. It is poorly explained in the show, even beyond these episodes, why Rudius is being a target for bullying. You say, oh, it's because he's a fat slob or anything like that. No, apparently, from what I've researched, in the light novel and the web novel, he gets bullied because he got so hyper focused in a good school that his grades went down. So he was forced into a bad school, kind of like I don't know, what's the word I'm looking for here? Not the correction center. Why is the word not coming to me? The school where kids, are typically your rougher types that can't fit in with the regular schooling system, so they get sent there. That's kind of what the school is like. So because his grades went down, he was forced there. And he had this huge fascination with computers, which made people think he was kind of a geek, which, yeah, sure, okay. And the ultimate reason why he gets bullied is because he called out a popular student when they skipped forward in line. I left that pregnant pause there because if you're like me, you're wondering, that's it? That's the breaking point for these people? None of the other things, not that those are good justifications for bullying, there is no such thing. But he called someone out on skipping a line, and that warrants him being stripped naked and having his photos taken of him in that, and something worse that'll happen later on in this episode in flashback. This is one of those things like, hey, yeah, bullying exists in schools. It does. It's verbal, it's physical, it happens in many different forms. Outside of one incident I can think of, it's a very minor one at that, have never been bullied. The one I can think of was after I just got my glasses. A girl in my class said they looked stupid on me and called me Four Eyes. It's like, wow, oh man, that cuts deep. Oh man. It's like, and you know how I handled it? I ignored it because it was stupid. Other people have had to deal with way worse than me. And I'm not trying to downplay that. But what I am saying is that this is a poor representation of actual bullying that occurs in schools. And it's a poor representation in the anime because it doesn't get explained why they're bullying him. Once again, not so we can say, oh, they have some noble goal for doing it. It's like, no, 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 no. What is their stupid, petty, evil reason for doing this that is not completely and utterly moronic in nature? Like maybe he's just better at school than they are and they're jealous. Or maybe some girl made a pass at him and one of the jocks gets upset with him. Comparing and contrasting again. Spider-Man, his days in high school. He was the outcast, the wallflower, the nerd. He didn't fit in with the other students. Flash Thompson, as his main bully, does not physically get aggressive with Peter. And this is, you can say, oh, it's just written in a more innocent time in the 60s. It's like, no, that's not what we're talking about here. It never got physical with them outside of the one boxing match they had organized by their teachers in Spider-Man 8, which is its own thing. But Flash never like beat up Peter or did anything like that, but he still made him feel lesser and did so successfully multiple times over. That's a good example of how to portray bullying versus this. It's just bad, poorly done. And I just don't get why you would think after writing that down, I was like, oh, yep, another successful day of writing. Got my kanji down pat. Yep, that's why they're bullying him. Man, I'm good. Like, no, that would be completely and utterly unsuccessful. If I saw anything that I ever wrote like that, it's like, what was I thinking? I need to change this right now. We need a new draft. But what we don't need a new draft on is Roxy's characterization here. Her starting to feel inadequate in such a short amount of time is handled extremely well. She's got this prodigy in front of her who can cast magic just so effortlessly. And that makes her feel like she's not good enough, that she needs to train herself. And that's good. It causes her to question things. It causes her to be, well, why am I doing this in the first place? I like that a lot. I wish she were in a better series. So back to the synopsis. Once again, about 6 months later, they're going to celebrate Rudius's 5th birthday. And that's how I remembered he was 4 earlier. As they celebrate in this world every 5 years until someone is 15, where you legally become an adult. So rather than just doing a birthday every year, it's like 5, 10, 15, boom, those are your birthdays. So Paul gives Rudius a sword that he can't really wield yet, explaining that a man must be willing to protect his wife and children. Zenith gives him a book that he'd asked for, and Roxy gives him a small wand with a magic stone inside of it to enhance his magical skills, telling him that she's going to give him a graduation exam tomorrow. This causes him to flash back to the bullying, where he was tied up naked at school. Roxy then makes him leave the house the next day, despite his protests, despite his emotional hangups, even picking him up on the horse herself and riding with him out of the town. This traumatizes him for a bit, but he sticks with her. When Rudius sees people along the way looking at him that are people of the village, he gets angry at them for staring only to make the realization that they weren't staring at him, but at Roxy, who spent the time to get to know them and help them with their problems. So they really like her, and this helps calm him down. They reach the exam spot, and Roxy tells him she's going to cast a sacred spell once, forcing him to memorize it and cast it, as she does so herself, casting the spell Cumulonimbus, accidentally striking their horse with lightning, forcing her to heal it. That was actually a pretty funny scene in a black comedy kind of way. I will give it that. Rudius then casts the spell in question, despite knowing that success will mean Roxy leaves, making a more powerful spell than hers. Roxy congratulates him for becoming a sacred level water mage. She then leaves soon after to hone her skills and gives him her necklace, which is a charm from her hometown. Rudius thanks her for helping him and privately thinks about how she helped heal him, which is promptly ruined when Lilia finds that he stole some of Roxy's panties. Ha 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 ha. Isn't that so great? We end on a good note like that. And everyone laughed. Things I like. Rudius being forced out of the house. They don't know the trauma he's experienced because he hasn't talked to them about it. Which, granted, super awkward conversation to have with someone. Yeah, I have the memories of a past life, and part of that was I got bullied to the extent that I never wanted to leave my house until I was forced out of the house, and then I died. Yeah, I get it. The amounts of therapy I would need after a situation like that, could not imagine how long it would take for me to open up. But still, give him something, man, something. But he does leave, and he realizes the outside world isn't that terrible. He can make something of himself here. And it took Roxy to do that for him. It didn't take his parents. It took Roxy. And she does a magnificent time. We get some nice characterization for her. In that, in these past couple of years, she hasn't been stagnant. She's went outside and she's met with these people and she's helped them and she's done good things with them. That is a really great character moment. That's a very beautifully stated in a small amount of time. Yeah, even though it's kind of a tell, don't show, uh, you could argue that it's still done effectively. So I'll give a point there. Next thing I like, the actual spell and what happens. It's such a huge moment for Rudius to show how far he's grown as a character and as a mage, that he's able to do this at such a young age, and it proves Roxy's point that she had made earlier, and that she's no longer worthy to be his master because of how far advanced he is than her. And he knows this is what's going to happen. He knows that him successfully completing this exam means she leaves. And yet, to his credit, he doesn't flub it on purpose. He doesn't just say, "Oh, I'm not feeling up to it today." No, he does it. And it's a very beautifully drawn scene. The animation in the show is pretty dang good. I will give it that. Let's talk about something I don't like, and that's how the episode ends. And I like it. I don't like it not only because of what has already been stated before about his poor characterization as far as being a pervert, but this is a story plot that he took these from her. It doesn't end here. We're still dealing with it to this day. And I don't like that. So we're going to end on a bad note. Imagine that for a show called Why I Don't Like. But those are the first two episodes of Mushoku Tensei Season 1, Part 1, Episodes 1 and 2. I'm going to try to score every episode. And just for the sake of transparency, for the entirety of what I have watched of Mushoku Tensei, I give it a 4 out of 10. And I know, given how numbers work, that if I do this episode by episode with scores and someone tallied them up, it's probably not going to come out to 4 out of 10. It could be higher, it could be lower. I don't care. My math is my math. So you don't have to use math my way. But I'm saying it's a 4 out of 10 overall. So when I say that I give episode 1 a 7 out of 10, it's a decent enough introduction. But there are many things that I have gripes with. I'm not too fond of. I don't like that much about it. It deserves a 7 out of 10. but then I give episode 2 an 8.5 out of 10, you can see, hey, not everything in here is negative. I may give the series overall 4 out of 10. But episode 2 is great for the both of them and developing who they are and what they're capable of as they wrestle with their past, as they wrestle with their present, and look forward to the future. That is a great note to end on, but the reason the score lowers is because of what we actually end on. So there's that. What do you guys think? I spent a way longer time talking than I thought I would, but I did do an intro for this. I probably should have split that up into an episode 0, but you know what? That's fine. It is what it is. So this episode will probably be longer than the other ones. I'm okay with that. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please, you get a chance, just leave a 5-star review on your podcasting platform of choice. Or if you're listening to this on YouTube, please like this video, comment below, and subscribe to the Systematic Geekology or Anazal Ministries podcasting pages. You can email me at whyidon'tlikepodcast@gmail.com. That is without an apostrophe and without the ellipses. So just straight letters. If you're interested in my own fiction writing and you want to criticize me, you can find my works at starvingwritersguild.com or on Amazon if you search the name MC Ashley. You can also find me podcasting on Systematic Geekology and Let Nothing Move You. Special thanks to Joshua Knoll for the music he provides for the podcast. And with all that in mind, God bless you all. That's the other one. That's the other outro. God bless you all anyways. But hey, with all that in mind, I spent a lot of time discussing what I don't like about Mushoku Tensei. But you know what I do like? You listeners. I like you. So see ya, Space Cowboy.